So we will call the meeting to order this evening. Can you hear me now, John? Gary?
John had this issue the other night.
Barry?
No sound.
I think it's John.
Gary's saying no as well.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
And Cindy and,
Is it the microphone on?
Your talk? Can you try now?
can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Thumbs up if you can hear me.
No.
Are you unmuted?
Yep.
No.
Try now.
On your video conference.
No, we don't, that gives the reverb.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah?
We've got some mediocre stuff. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. So we will call the Governance and Priorities Advisory Committee meeting to order at 6:39 p.m. Item number 2, adoption of the agenda. Can I please get a motion?
Sure.
Councillor Gordon? All in favor?
I can hardly hear you there. Deputy Mayor, I can hardly hear you.
Is that the same computer that we were using?
No, it's not, but that is.
So I'm just wondering if it's the microphone
I
on.
can hear Mr. Sharpie, but I can't hear Lam.
Okay, option 2.
You'll have to reconnect your audio.
1 minute.
You can say a 3-minute recess. I'm kidding.
Now that's Monet.
Okay. Okay.
Leave the meeting.
Leave the meeting. Oh, she can't leave the meeting because she's got it up on the screen.
But so does.
Todd's the host. You can't leave the meeting.
Sorry, guys.
70s concert.
Nothing's ever easy in this chambers.
Yeah, I just left computer audio on now. Okay.
Okay, testing. Can you hear me now?
No.
Do you have the volume turned up on your devices?
Yeah, it's interesting. It just sounds really soft.
John, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, but it sounds like you're in an echo chamber.
Okay.
I can hear you just fine now, Lana, since I turned my volume up. Thank you.
That's funny.
No, it's not.
Okay, Barry, can you hear me? You can hear me,
Yeah,
okay.
you're-
Cindy's good?
Councillor Waring, turn it on.
And Councillor Waring, you're gonna have to turn up your mic like our other senior councillor did.
My mic was turned off.
Oh. All right, proceed. We have got a motion from Councillor Gordon for adoption of the agenda. All in favor? Okay, so I've got all of our councillors from home in favor. Carried. Item number 3, adoption of the previous minutes.
Give me that. Oh, no,
Okay,
we
I'm just
don't
seeing the note here. It doesn't look like we need adoption. We adopted those minutes at the December 16th regular council meeting, so moving on. Delegations, there are none scheduled. Item number 5, bylaws and policies. Review proposed traffic and parking control bylaw 20-1106. I believe I'll pass things on to Monique LeBlanc for a presentation.
You should be able to just use your speaker.
Great. Can everybody hear me? Yep, great. Good evening, council. With me, I have colleagues Heather Thompson as well as Officer Trevor Bowman, who've assisted in developing tonight's presentation. As you recall, I think it was back in February initially, there had been a resolution by Councillor Waring to take a look at how we may be able to add more enforcement to residents who do not remove their vehicles during snow events or street cleaning. From there was a presentation made to council on April 6th, and they accepted it to go forward to the GPAC. Tonight, what we hope to do is provide you the details of our research as well as some of the considerations that we provided within the context of a new proposed bylaw, and then make recommendations to move this forward to council. So you may recall that in the past, especially around the cul-de-sac issues and parking in there were definitely some notices that the bylaw was outdated, and as we researched and took a look at it, it was very evident that in terms of enforceability, it needed a full redraft. So what you have before you is that the new bylaw has been written to bring it up to today's standards. Included you'll notice that the amendments regarding enforceability as suggested were made following a legal review by our prosecuting lawyer, Jim Hiddley. As well, the definitions have been expanded or removed for clarity and consistency in the use of terms. As well, we have provided for additional enforcement levels to ticket and tow, which would provide that additional level of enforcement during snow events or street cleaning. We also have separated out the fines and penalties for further clarity. That's Schedule A. It also has a defined designated truck route, which has been redrawn for clarity. That's Schedule B. Also it clarifies the angle parking regulations, which I'll ask Officer Bowman in a moment to go into a little bit farther. And then the consolidation of the truck routes, as well as the amendment addressing alley parking specific to the 500 block of Sunset Boulevard between John Street and Blacklock Way is addressed in this also. And then it finally includes an alignment with other bylaws, including the property responsibility bylaw. This, in addition to the bylaw, is also accompanied by the snow and ice control policy and procedures. We have not brought that forward tonight because that would be a separate look once we have further direction from the Governance Priorities Committee. And then that would be looking at a possible seasonal parking ban, which would allow, again, additional enforceability. So what we will be looking further at in terms of considerations will be to amend that snow and ice control policy, as I mentioned, to establish snow routes, to ensure that all of this aligns with the property responsibility bylaw, which we will be presenting shortly after this. We also have some land use bylaw items that need to align, and when we are involved in the bylaw review, those will be added. And then we really do recommend in terms of public input that if this goes to first reading, at the next council meeting, then there would be a public hearing to take a look at that. I'd like to pass it on to my colleagues just for additional information as far as any of the key highlights to be able to enforce this, and I'll pass it on to Officer Bowman for some of the content that you would have discussed with the prosecuting lawyer and some of the challenges that may have been faced before that now have been addressed.
Okay, where's the- Good evening. My comments will be made through the CAO to the chair and the rest of the council. If there's any questions afterwards, by all means, I'll be happy to answer them. When we reviewed this parking bylaw, or the traffic bylaw, there's a number of updates that need to be completed. Some of the highlights, I'll go through them with you. The first one will be storage of vehicles on roadways. Where before we handled them under abandoned vehicles, 72 hours, they had to be moved under the Traffic Safety Act. Unfortunately, if you park your vehicle in front of your house and you go away for a couple days, and leave your vehicle here, us towing your vehicle would not go over quite well. So when we say storage, we define storage in the bylaw as basically you neglect the vehicle sitting here with flat tires. That way we'll tell you to move your vehicle, we'll remove it for you. The fines in this are very close to those into the storage or abandoned vehicle for the Traffic Safety Act. The fines involved in this bylaw are very close to other municipalities. We're done in comparison, or with the Traffic Safety Act of Alberta, so they're not in a line. Some of the other things we included in here, trucks in residential zones, setting weight limits on trucks, including length and width, which includes trailers. I believe the length alone is 12.5 meters. A number of our residential areas, we are seeing large trucks with triaxle trailers taking up 3 or 4 spaces in neighborhoods where parking is a premium. This causes undue hardship on many residents in the area for if someone wants to bring their work truck home. So we've defined that. We've also looked into depositing snow on highways where this wasn't covered before. A number of residents were basically shoveling their walks off and dumping it all into our catch basins. This prevents them from shoveling their snow onto public highways and causing issues with infrastructure. So the other things, obstructions on highways, this includes moving pods, piles of dirt. All of these, because they're not insurable, pose risks of liability to the city. If people are going to want to put a moving pod or a storage pod, they'll have to put it on their own property. It should not become a worry of the municipality itself. We've tightened up RV parking, where before we didn't allow people to park their RVs from May till September, I believe it was, or October. Now if you're gonna bring your RV home, it's gotta be parked adjacent to your property. It can't be sitting in front of your neighbor's property for 2 or 3 days, blocking their view. It's not fair to them. In addition, it causes visibility issues for their oncoming traffic. So we also looked into the truck routes. They're more clearly defined, as you can see in Schedule C in the bylaw. We also looked into charging sections. Our other bylaw did not allow us to charge the RO. So we issued a parking ticket before. We had to go through the Traffic Safety Act, which is similar to a photo radar ticket, where the province actually takes a portion of that fine because it is a provincial charge. Under this new bylaw, we have our own registered owner charging section, which means any fine money goes back directly to the municipality itself. One of the other interesting things we found doing some research on this is we do have a couple of residents that require specialized handicap parking. In doing some research into this, in the past, the town has actually flipped the bill for paying for these parking stalls, which actually go to, and some of these people are renters. The City of Calgary actually charges the resident to do the install themselves. So, meaning before where the town was paying for handicap parking stalls for residents on public streets, it's now the onus is back on the residents. If they want that, they can apply to the city or apply to the town to have that done, and it'll become at their expense. As far as angle parking is not permitted in the town anywhere unless it's issued, unless it's permitted through an issue or through a permit issued through the CAO. We only have one area in town where we are dealing with angle parking, where a permit has been issued, and there have been no issues whatsoever, so we're quite pleased with that. However, that is addressed in the bylaw. Parking in alleys has become also a bit of an issue, people parking outside their fence lines. We've had discussions in the past where we need to look probably at some additional signage to advise residents that you cannot park your vehicle in the alley. And that's an ongoing discussion with Public Works, and we're moving forward with that, hopefully. As far as off-highway vehicles, again, we've taken a stance that's been fairly effective in the past, where we didn't see much need to change that section around. However, we did include some of the definitions and broaden them, such as commercial vehicles or truck routes, especially coming up onto Kelton, which has a 5-ton limit. Some of the vehicles we're seeing are going up there at 17 tons, 36 tons. Vehicles like that cause significant infrastructure damage, which comes back basically to the taxpayer to pay for. So we've increased the fines there, and allows us through permitting to regulate and govern what vehicles are using that roadway. Idling of vehicles is also addressed in here. Idling vehicles on private property is something that's extremely hard to regulate under a traffic law or traffic bylaw, as that's occurring on private property. It's important to note that the traffic bylaw regulates traffic-related activities on public roads. It has no application to private property unless a person is parked on private property and it's a complaint from the owner of that property or that agent, where we do have grounds. As far as the snow clearing and street maintenance, we've tightened that up enough where we will take steps to notify the owner of these vehicles to have them removed. We've also put in sections where inoperable vehicles will not be permitted on roadways. We found that as a common occurrence, especially in the colder months, where we ask people to move their vehicles so we get street cleaning or snow clearing done, and they say, oh, the car doesn't start. Well, it shouldn't be on the road in the first place. So steps will be taken through social media, working with our Public Works folks to get the word out when we are starting snow clearing after a snow event. And barring that, every opportunity is given to these people to remove their vehicles. If they choose not to, we have different options, such as ticket and tow if need be. So overall, this is it's a fairly lengthy bylaw. It's fairly, I would say fairly in depth. However, it's not, there's nothing ground shaking in this that should cause any concerns to residents or anything else. So if you have any questions regarding this document, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I guess we'll open up to questions. I think Councillor Gordon had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have 3 questions, and thanks administration for putting this together, so well done. The first question deals with number 8 and number 26. So number 8 is our obstruction of highways, and number 26 is our road obstruction, and 26 speaks specifically to snow removal. And so the question I have, when we have number 8, obstruction of highways, first of all, this phrase obstruction of highways, does it deal with every road in Turner Valley, or only that which is designated as Alberta Transport Highway?
Through the CAO to the chair, to Councillor Gordon. Under the Traffic Safety Act, a highway is designated as any public roadway. Obstruction in this case would apply to any public highway, alley, street, avenue, that the public has a reasonable expectation of travel and access to.
Okay, if I may, as a follow-up then, when I did a little bit of research in other communities, where they had, like for instance, here we have 8.4, subject to section 8.2 and 8.3, no person shall make or place an obstruction of any kind or permit any obstruction to be made or placed in, upon or above any highway unless written permission has been granted by the operations and facility manager. So where I'm coming to this point is yard material, where quite often a 4 or 5 yards of material will be placed where a resident would normally park their vehicle. And most other bylaws I've read would allow up to 48 hours, so the permitting process wouldn't have to go through. I'm just wondering if that's something that we would consider to make it a little bit more simple, clearly identified. You know, for instance, even this weekend, I'm getting a pile of 5 yards of 3-inch rock, right? So I've got a driveway, I'm gonna be able to put that on there. But I'm wondering, just recently a neighbor had 5 yards of topsoil come in, and I said, you know what, our bylaw doesn't speak specifically to that as clearly as maybe it could. And I said, they got it off within 2 days anyway. So I'm wondering if we should consider that instead of putting the extra layer on there, contact our operations and facilities manager, they'll give you a permit. Why don't we just write it in the bylaw? Yard material, if placed where you would normally park, you have 48 hours to move the material. For me, that makes just a little bit simpler. And then secondly, when I see vehicles, off-road vehicles on our roadways, I know this has become an issue recently. I noticed it on Facebook with the golf course having their equipment and their golf carts up and down the roads on a regular basis in and around the golf course. So clearly the liability issue is on them operating an off-road vehicle on a maintained highway or public roadway. I'm wondering if we should identify that, if there's a permit allowed for that. And then last but not least, I don't see it here, so if you would point me out to it, are those handicap spaces where some of our residents have the handicap and they've come to the council and requested having 5 meters of handicap parking in front of their own place? So I'm just thinking of across from the school on the north side of Edward, that corner home has that already. So I'm wondering if we should identify that in here, making it a consistent allowance for our residents.
Through the CEO to the chair, to Councilor Gordon. Let's first touch base on the material issue. My concern from that is, and I understand it, it's reasonable to be able to do that. My concern from this point is the liability standpoint. Is if someone runs into it, heaven forbid it's dark or anything else like that, for allowing us to put something like that on the roadway, my concern would be would the city be liable for it? If we are going to allow it, I think there should be a policy in place through Public Works or our Roads Department where they can work on a policy that will permit it, which may include putting pylons out or other
Reflected material?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I would probably put in policy, not in a bylaw. As for off-highway vehicles, I can advise, this has been an issue that's come up in our office quite a bit lately. And doing some research, we did discover a 2008 agreement through the golf course which allowed easements through a tripartite agreement that allowed the golf course to use golf carts and maintenance equipment on public roadways up in that area.
So if I can have a follow-up before we get to that. Let me, if I may, follow up through the chair on that one. So these 2008 easements, coming back to a liability issue, where does that, I mean, to me, that's a little bit of a yellow flag at best, because off-road vehicles, you don't have to have them plated. Well, there's another issue to that. You should have them plated if you're using them on public highways, that's the law. And so when we're talking about golf carts, they're designed to be, liability only covers while on golf course property. So when you're crossing the street, those courses that allow for that, there's, I'm a little bit concerned about that easement, I'll be honest.
Through the CEO to the chair, to Councilman Gordon. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I cannot speak to liability and legal matters through this agreement. I can only go by, I'm only guided and governed by that agreement that's in place that the town has with the other parties of that agreement.
No problem.
Okay, so we've got, John Waring,
Let's do the
please.
handicap spaces.
Oh, sorry, one more thing, handicap spaces. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
So the question regarding handicap stations, it's in section 21 of the bylaw here.
I must have missed it, sorry.
No problem. So currently, right now, if a resident requests a handicap parking stall in front of their house, it's important to note that that handicap parking stall is not specifically theirs. If another adjacent resident is handicapped, they may use that stall also. And we've had that problem in the past, where if a person wants that handicap stall for themselves, I mean, there has to be some onus on them, where they've gotta pay for, where they figure to pay for the installation, that stall will belong to them, it's in front of their house. And unfortunately, we have had incidents where we have had adjacent residents using that stall, and has led up to a few disagreements between neighbors.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay, I've got quite a few things, so if I could do question and answer and stuff until I finish, is that okay? Firstly, with respect to overweight vehicles used in Colton, when we requested Alberta Transport to put the signage on the main highway to indicate access to Turner Valley South, they did tell us in that meeting at AUMA that we were responsible to put a sign up ourselves to indicate that overweight vehicles did not have access to Turner Valley on that route. Because what happens, they turn there, they go down 16th Avenue and they come to Decatur, they turn right and they come into town, and then they see the sign. They're not going to turn around and go all the way back. So that's just a little bit for your information. That sign was never put up by the previous administration. With respect to the golf carts, easy one, there's a sign at the entrance to Imperial Drive from Decatur that permits golf carts to travel all the way through till the clubhouse and the driving range. There's another one at that end as well. And there are the 3 crossings that are in the agreement as easements for the golf carts. And now to go to the bylaw. In 8.1, when I read that, no driver of a vehicle shall stop a person or vehicle or permit a vehicle or allow an object to be left on the highway, it seems a bit clumsy worded, so I don't particularly understand what it's trying to tell me. Then if I go, if you want to answer that now, or I can keep going. If I go to 9.2, the town shall ensure that any temporary signage that limits parking on a specific highway or area is installed 24 hours prior to. Would it not be useful to say whenever possible somewhere in there? Because if there's a sudden emergency, there's never going to be 24 hours notice. You're just going to put the signs up and go. And then on 10.1, this could be my being English and not North American, I don't understand the difference. But when you're talking about a vehicle having metal spikes, that, I'm assuming that's not referring to snow studs that you would get in tyres on a normal vehicle. Okay. And then on 12.2, when they're referring to sidewalk, for where persons, when they're riding bicycles, roller skates, and all this sort of stuff. There's nowhere in the beginning where we give the definitions about sidewalks or pathways or walkways or anything else. And I just wonder whether, because in certain places we're referring to sidewalks, I think somewhere else there's a pathway, whether that needs to be defined more clearly. So can I do that on a pathway, but I can't do it on a sidewalk? 14.9, point 1, point I, sorry. When parallel parking on a highway, comma, the driver of a vehicle shall not park the vehicle with the sides of it parallel to the curb. surely if I'm parallel parking, I've got to be parallel to the curb.
What point was that?
14.9, I think, I.
It's I in, it's 14.9 I. It's on page 12 of 16 on my printer.
John,
Page 20 of the Bylaw.
John, do we maybe wanna, before we move too far forward, do we maybe wanna address some of these and maybe address them one at a time? Cause there's, I just don't want any of your comments to get lost. Do we maybe wanna pause, address the ones you've brought up, and then we can have comment back from,
Yeah,
okay.
Good job.
yeah, but I did ask you to do that. Trevor said just keep going. That's why I did.
Okay, so
You're gonna
let's
be- you're gonna be that
pause
many.
here and we'll give Trevor a chance
It's
to.
not often I get a chance to get one back up the COP.
Okay, so maybe I'll put it over to Officer Bowman for a moment here to respond to the questions that you've had so far, and then maybe we can just go question, answer, so we don't get too far ahead. Thanks.
Through the CAO to the chair to council of warning. One step at a time here, I guess. First, we'll start with the pathway and sidewalk. This was not included in our definitions. It was not identified as an issue with our legal counsel. However, this is something we can definitely look at, and I can bring that up to them and see if this is something we actually do need to bring in to the definitions. But again, it was not identified as an issue through legal counsel. As far as the signage 24 hours in advance, yes, there are issues where emergency street cleaning or emergency street repairs will be required. We highlighted 24 hours. It gives the residents enough time to get their vehicles off the road. However, there is a stipulation within the bylaw itself where if we do ask people to remove their vehicles, they do have to do so. Again, this will be done in emergency situations at a request through Public Works, or let's say even the fire department, where they need access to something where their vehicle has to be moved immediately. If they're unable to, we can move the vehicle on their behalf.
Okay.
Okay, as section 10, as track vehicles, as you're talking about, that's basically like driving a tank.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just like, I was thinking of studs in the snow trail.
And winter tires, no, not at all. This is Alberta, we wouldn't have to worry about that. But, yeah, no, that's more geared toward track vehicles, bulldozers along those lines that are using our roadways. Again, they damage the infrastructure and cause damage to the pavement. It was passed on to the taxpayer.
Okay, so if we go to 14.9 item I, which is at the top of page 12 of 60. It says when parallel parking on a highway, the driver of a vehicle shall not park that vehicle with the sides of it parallel to the curb or edge of the roadway.
And if you look at section J there, it means basically parking against the side of traffic though. If you look at the bottom of section J there, with the vehicle facing against the direction of travel authorized for that highway.
Oh, because it's in connecting, it's in and.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just, to me the wording is clumsy.
It is, but again, it went through our legal process and this is the wording they've chose to use, so.
Yeah, because with it being I and J, I would have thought if the J wasn't there, then you'd realise this was all the same thing, but I'm okay, I'm good.
Okay, sir.
John, is that, are you done?
I think he is.
Yeah. Okay. John, does that complete your questions, John? Okay, so handing it over to Jamie, Councilor Wilkie.
Thanks. A couple of big questions. I think you covered off, my main one was around highways being the definition, and does that get confusing for residents? But I think you're saying that's how it's defined provincially, so that makes sense that it's gonna come across.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay, is that better, guys? Can you hear me now? Okay. I'll just yell into this thing. I'll do kind of question and answer then. The first one was around off-highway vehicles. I ask this because I actually looked this up when we purchased a quad for my son, and it's kind of a little toy electric quad, right? And the way that I read this, technically, I think it probably falls into off-highway vehicle. And I've seen other communities where they've sort of limited it to, you know, incapable of a speed above a certain amount or something to that effect. Is that something that you guys looked at here? I mean, the last thing I want to see is you guys have to flash the red and blues to pull over a Power Wheels or something, right? And I know that there's obviously discretion within your ability, but I'm just curious if that's something that you guys have given thought to.
Through the CAO to the Chair Councilman Wilkie, discretion is a big part of it. When we look at off-highway vehicles, where we look at speeds, the onus is on us then, if we had to go into court on something to prove how fast that vehicle can go or didn't go. At that point, we're getting down in the weeds, which require us seizing vehicles, possibly getting warrants for vehicles, where some common sense and discretion goes a long way. Our off-highway vehicle bylaw is pretty robust, because when I first started here, it wasn't uncommon to see quads and everything else racing down the roadways. Have we seized quads in the past? Yes, we have, but this has happened after 2 or 3 warnings that this thing is just going to happen. A child on a battery operated quad, well, if he can ride it, why can't we? I mean, I get discretion. It's the bylaws, unfortunately, are define the lowest acceptable level of behavior, and again, it's not to punish reasonable people.
Thanks for that. I'll tell him to keep it under 40 then.
It's a cool quad.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, and I was just curious. I thought there may be some issues around determining how fast something could go, because you can, have a lot of issues there. So I appreciate that. The other thing was trucks. So I do have a little bit of a concern around this. The 4,500 kilo GVW and the width of 2 meters. And the reason that I have a concern around this is a lot of kind of oil field trucks, or your basic Super Duty F350 with no mirrors on it is 80 inches wide, which puts it over 2 meters, right? And so you throw tow mirrors onto something like that, and it's well over 2 meters. And similarly on the GVW front, your basic kind of oil field truck could easily have an 11,400 GVW on it, right, to stay under the interprovincial regulations. And it for a lot of people, that may be their kind of personal / work vehicle, right? And I just don't want us to get into a spot where we're potentially preventing that. So how did the thought go into those specific restrictions, I guess? And have you seen other approaches that could get around that issue potentially?
Through the CAO to the Chair, Councilman Wilkie. When we looked at size of vehicles, one of the important things to look at here is that, first off, damaged infrastructure. 4,500 kilograms is usually a standard throughout the province if you look at other traffic bylaws. Same with the width and weight on these vehicles. The concern we have with these larger vehicles in our residential areas, A, they take up significant amount of parking. B, they are a hazard to I guess, be able to see other kids or other vehicles in these areas. These roads, they're not narrow. However, you put 2 large vehicles on a roadway, you're not going to get two-way traffic through these areas. And let me just check one definition here. I apologize, so bear with me. When we look at the definition of truck, we're looking at vehicles which are commercially registered and primarily designed for the transportation of property, including bed trucks, bigger trucks, and along those lines. They were looking at vehicles that are significantly larger than most vehicles in residential areas. We have had numerous complaints of industrial type vehicles being brought to people's residence. If you are looking at some of these larger industrial vehicles or commercial vehicles, they are significantly bigger than what's permitted. And I know some of our complaints complaints are, we don't want to look at an oil-filled truck sitting in front of my house for 3 days. It's a safety concern because of all the kids in the neighborhood. And again, if you put these larger vehicles on some of our roads, there's no way you're gonna get two-way traffic past those. In addition, 4,500 kilograms, you have to keep in mind that these residential streets are not built to the same specifications as our highways. And again, you're looking at infrastructure, possible infrastructure damage if you start having heavier vehicles come in these surface roads.
Okay, I think that helps clarify where it's coming from, and I get all of the concerns. I was a little concerned that the truck definition included either commercial or privately registered. Commercial, potentially privately registered, I get a little more concerned about, but that's fine. I appreciate the background there, and the last thing I wanted to touch on was school zones. It looks like we've gone away from the distinction between school and playground, and we're just blanket 8:30 till an hour after dusk. Is that correct? Did I read that correct? Okay.
So, Turner Valley does not have any school zones anymore. What Calgary and a lot of other places have done now, they've moved to a harmonized speed zone model. Turner Valley, we actually got rid of our school zones quite a while ago, went straightly to playground zones, because again, we have one school, and on that school ground is a playground, and there's after school activities throughout the year. So rather than narrow the scope of that zone, we kept it in place. So it covers it 365, 7 days a week.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have for now. I just wanted to make sure that I was reading that correct. I prefer that approach. I don't have to think about whether it's a school day or not or anything. It's always 30. So okay.
Okay, Mayor Crane, you're up next.
Hey, good evening, guys. Thanks for coming, Trevor. Actually, I'll follow up quickly right on top of Councillor Wilkie. My point out was going to be the 8:30 time zone, because by 8:30 all the kids are actually at school. So 7:30 to me would probably make more sense. School zone, of course, like you say, school zones, but I'm just wondering, is that? Well, it's not early enough in my opinion. That's why I'm bringing it up. I think it should be 7:30, just because between 8 and 8:30 is when all the kids are actually on road. So thoughts on 8:30? Why 8:30? And is that something that we can discuss about changing to an earlier time?
Through the CEO to the chair, to the mayor. I'll have to double check that. I thought it was actually 7:30 on that. I will double check. Perhaps the signs weren't changed. Anyways, under section 107 sub 3, the Traffic Safety Act, the Traffic Safety Act allows municipalities to define the speed limits and time zones for playground zone and school zones in their respective jurisdictions. As such, making such a change would not be a big deal at all. It's well within our purview.
Excellent, thank you. Next one, next two actually are just kind of petty, more personal experience than anything. 8.2, no person except emergency personnel shall allow, cause, or is permitted to place a cord, wire, hose, or any other obstruction crossing sidewalk, road, or pathway. So I only reference that. Trailers plugging in their trailer while they're getting it souped up, running water to it to charge up the tanks, electrical cords for winter. Again, it's that layer of discretion, I'm assuming, and the lowest common denominator. So is there something in there that we could add, I don't know, that would be, that could allow them to do that without feeling bad, as in a safe manner or an unsafe manner or something to that effect? Or is it something that you would just look at, see, and use the discretion?
To the CEO, to the chair, to Mayor Crane. Situation like this, again, it is lowest common denominator. When we design and look at this bylaw, we need to look at liability for the town. If we permit this, if someone trips over it, or anything else like that, or damages property, if we're permitting this, is the town can hold some liability on this. I agree, there is some discretion here. I mean, if people are just filling up and they're taking off for the weekend, you know, chances are they may get a talking to, or it's not gonna be there that long. This is for cases where people have systematically abused it and left trailers or hoses across the sidewalks, or even across the road in some cases, for a day or two, only to tell us that it'll be done in a couple hours and they'll be out of there, and in truth, they're not. So we've got a plan for worst case scenario and protect the liability of the city when we design these bylaws.
Okay, alright, sounds good. And the last one, just because, snow removal and people throwing snow out to the road drives me nuts, and Batty and Council Waring was all over this, quite a ways back. So we just have the one reference to it in 26, just no person shall permit snow to be removed from private property or sidewalk and deposited in the public property highway. Is that enough? Because I really, really wanted to make sure that people know we don't wanna do this. It actually increases all the work of the town. It makes everything harder to do. So is this the only portion that we have that bites into the snow shovelers, into roadways? And is the fine hefty enough? I think it was 150 or 250.
Kind of sort of, it's a combination.
250, 150, yeah, so. Anyway, something I was wondering for, is it, for the CAO, maybe a question, in the upcoming year, are we gonna have an education piece around why we don't want this happening? And I'll leave it at that. That's my only, comments. Other than that, everything was fun. And I like the, points and discussions that were brought up, earlier.
Did you wanna comment on that? I think it's also mentioned in section 8. But snow removal education, I think that's a great idea. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure if you guys heard me there. I was just saying that I also believe that the snow removal is brought up in section 8, Mayor Crane. But I think education is a great idea for, you know, the upcoming winter season, that maybe we put some information out to the community. Can you not hear me again? Okay, I'll get a lot closer. Okay. Officer Bowman?
In speaking with the section there regarding snow clearing, it's pretty cut and dry. It is, don't put your snow on public lands. Yes, the fines are there. Again, the fines start off relatively small. However, we do have the option to increase those by summoning the person to court rather than a simple ticket, for repeat offenders that continue to do this and cause more work for our public works crews. Again, going into next winter season, a public engagement or a public campaign would be preferable to educate these folks before we get to this point of enforcement. Again, our goal here is education before enforcement. However, I know we are going to have issues with certain folks in certain areas that will continue to do this and cause more work for our public works guys.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments from council on this? Who do we have? Oh, Councillor Rob.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question is a follow-up, maybe it's something John mentioned earlier. I totally understand why we don't want heavy vehicles crossing to go up the bridge, but maybe this question's more to, the CAO, but I'm not sure about the signage. You know, I drive that golf course road all the time, and I don't recall seeing signs on either end. And perhaps they are there, but I haven't seen them, and I think that's pretty critical, because you don't want to have, logging trucks crossing to go up the bridge, because it'll do irreparable damage to it. So that would be my main comment.
To the CEO, to the chair, to Councilor Rapp, I can advise that both sides, north and south side of DeKalta, are flagged or are properly signed as 5-ton maximum limit. We're fortunate enough where we don't get a lot of traffic. Our public or our roads crew does occasionally issue permits for that roadway under certain circumstances, but for the ordinary folks who are looking for a shortcut because of the GPS sends them through, sends them up to Delta instead of going through Black Diamond as they head south, we don't permit overweight vehicles. signage, public infrastructure, and number two is the number of complaints we get from the residents up at the top in the 1500 block of DeKalta. That seems to be an ongoing issue, and it wasn't until we started, the signage was placed in there and we educated a lot of the folks that they can't be using it anymore. That seems to have caused that, or calmed that issue down quite a bit.
Councilor Ray?
So the problem with our roads and transport foresaw was the fact that somebody coming north on 22, approaching Black Diamond, would see the sign that said access to the Turner Valley South, and turn left, go down 646 or whatever it is, and hit 16th Avenue, and then turn right down to Colza. If they're overweight by the time they get to Colza, they don't know they can't go down there. And they did make that suggestion that we should put signage where is it 646? 406. 22.
434. That's fine. We'll take a look and adjust if we need to.
Through the CEO to the chair, Council Warren. So again, a situation like that is, I believe 434 Avenue is presently signed at 75%. As a professional driver, those people who operate these large vehicles and stuff, the onus is on them to know their route. There are services in place that will plan their route for them, get the appropriate permissions through the municipalities to have an approved route. And if they're gonna be coming into Turner Valley, again, it's signed, perfectly signed, just before entering Turner Valley is a 75% roadway, and before you come down to Kelta, it's signed as 5-ton maximum limit. Again, the onus is on them. As a professional driver, they should be aware what the route is and what the approved truck route should be.
Councilor Holiday?
Had a couple questions that haven't been answered yet. First, we're talking in 12.6, talking about kids wearing helmets while under the supervision, their parents' supervision. If kids are out on their own and they're not wearing their helmets, do you ticket the kids directly, or do you track down their parents, or how does that process look?
Through the CEO to the chair, Councilman Holiday. Again, this is actually more of an educational piece. The idea here is we want to see the children wearing their helmets. We do school education for it as well. However, kids are going to be kids. They may not want to wear their helmet. The idea here is to ensure that parents are providing them with the proper safety equipment to be able riding their bikes, skating, or skateboarding. All too often we are running into kids where they don't have the proper safety equipment. The goal here is to educate the parents, to let them know they are responsible to ensure that their children are properly equipped. And again, depending on the age, could a charge be laid under the bylaw? Possibly. Would you want to use that more as an educational component? Absolutely.
Okay, my next question, if I can, idling of vehicles in section 15. I've heard this a few times amongst, disgruntled residents about town vehicles getting idled, and they don't like to see taxpayer dollars spending money on idling. So I know that we're exempt under this, town vehicles, but is there some sort of internal policy you can remind me or tell me that you're educating this employees? This is, I guess, a question for the CAO, so that they're not idling more than they absolutely have to.
Sure. So we certainly do not enforce this with town staff. However, in some situations, there are staff who require to keep their vehicles idling. For example, our municipal enforcement vehicles have computer systems and other things that run while the vehicle idles. Certainly too for emergency responses. We don't want them to have to get into a cold vehicle or have a vehicle risk not starting when they need to be able to go. So it's always a balance between what's required, but certainly I think staff can always be better, and we do periodically remind them of that. But we're certainly not going around trying to catch them doing it.
Okay. Yeah. Other quick one. I did want to ask more about the RVs, but I want to jump ahead to 23.2. So it seems a little crazy that you can get a parade organized in 48 hours. The original bylaw had 7 days prior. I mean, we're asking people to submit questions for question period like the Wednesday prior, so if I can plan a parade in 48 hours, that's like crazy. So I don't know if that's just needs to be retweaked or if there was a reason for 48 hours. And just something to look into. And then back to the RV. So I don't own an RV and I'm not in town, so I don't, I'm in town, but I'm not in where all the action is, knowing what's going on with RVs. Did we have a rule allowing, the exemption that you can only be there for 48, or is this totally new that they have to get off within 48 hours? Section 17.
Okay. Through the CEO to the chair, to Councilwoman Holiday. I'll touch first base on the parade. When we see a parade, we're not thinking of Diamond Valley Days of the Stampede Parade. This is more of a procession or a parade, meaning it could be a memorial service or something leaving the church after a funeral or along those lines. So when we think of parade, we're not thinking of marching bands or anything else like that, that's for sure. Okay, and sometimes, unfortunately, we do not get a lot of notice on these. We will occasionally get memorial runs for motorbikes coming through town. Again, this is what that's aimed for, if it's more organized. And as far as RVs, the Traffic Safety Act allows 72 hours when it comes to RVs. Again, our RVs, I believe, in that section, will you just bear with me for a minute here, please? Thanks. It's rather a large document, so when we look at 48 hours, that's something that can be adjusted. However, 48 hours we found is more than enough time to load your RV and unload it and clean it out upon returning from your holiday or your trip. Again, these RVs are quite large, some of them, and in some cases they take up quite a bit of room. What we found sometimes also is these folks have the pullouts on the sides where they're literally blocking an entire lane of travel. Again, we want the RVs in and out as quickly as we possibly can to ensure a smooth traffic flow and safety of the residents and the motorists that are using that roadway.
Okay, so it was 72 hours and we've gone under the Traffic Safety Act. That's what residents are used to. So just down to 48 hours, so it's not. I'm just wondering, because I know with COVID, we relaxed restrictions, so we're letting people park more. But I guess I'm just confused in how all this has happened.
Yeah.
The old bylaw was 48.
Councillor Wilkie has something to add on this one.
Yeah,
Officer Bowman, thank you.
I was just gonna say, Cindy, I looked into that as well. Section 41 of the old bylaw, 41D, or sorry, I guess it was 41, the second C had 48 hours in it as well. So it's not a change, from the prior bylaw.
Do we have any other questions or concerns?
No, I guess my only other concern with that is in some of our neighborhoods where there's, like, I'm thinking Robert Street, being able to find parking even in front of your house sometimes is challenging. Is that, so I don't know how 17.1 where you have to if somebody's parked there and their vehicle's there? Like, that would be my only concern.
Through the CEO to the chair to Councilwoman Holiday. Again, the idea here is to minimize the impact of people's RVs on their adjacent neighbors. Yes, there might be people parked there, but again, we want to keep their impact to the rest of the neighborhood to a minimum. And in some cases, I know we have had incidents where neighbors are looking out at the side of a great big diesel pusher for 3 days straight. Again, that's not fair to them, and we try to plan for the best case scenario. If there's someone parked there, you have a neighbor, as long as every reasonable step is taken. I mean, discretion again plays a huge role in our jobs. But if your neighbor's parked their RV in front of your house for 3 days or 2 days, there's a spot open in front of his house, there's no reason why they shouldn't be putting their RV in front of their place, not your neighbors to stare at for 2 or 3 days.
CAO Sharp's got a follow-up to that as well.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Hamilton. Just maybe a bit of a wrap-up comment to some of the things that Officer Bowman has talked about is discretion is the best part of what our folks use, and it's education before enforcement. I think you've heard that theme over and over again. If we write this bylaw and some of the changes aren't working, or Officer Bowman and Officer O'Leary go completely off the rails and on a power trip and start enforcing things to the letter of the law, we can change it. If something's working or it was not working as intended, we can come back and change it. And so I just want to reassure council that in time, like most bylaws, things get war gamed. We have examples that we haven't anticipated, and we're back in front of you trying to modify things to make it work best for our community.
Councilor Wilkie?
Just one question, sorry, can you turn that mic off? It's just around the parking rules on the one particular alley that's listed. Is there a reason? Is that just because the hill's so steep on the front road there, they're allowed to park in the alley? Does anybody know what the history is there, why it's different from everywhere else?
Yes, and in relation to that area, this is going back quite a while ago. Parking in that area is extremely tight. The roadway there, again, fairly steep. Not to mention you have an intersection there coupled with a stop sign where you're taking up to 5-10 meters of laneway or street where people cannot park. In the back there, the alley is fairly wide with a field on the other side. The decision of council at the time was to exempt that area, only that area, because there was sufficient room at the back of the residence with nothing on the south side of the road where traffic would be impeded or emergency vehicles could get in.
Okay. Thanks, just curiosity.
Okay, Jonathan, did you have something else on that?
Yeah, if I may, just as a follow-up to Cindy, I kind of like the 48-hour notice for the parade / procession. And I'm just thinking along the lines of, should residents want to have a protest, they don't have to wait 7 days. It can still be relative close to the time frame from which they may want to protest. So I don't know if that was the reasoning there either.
Councilor Rapp? Oh, sorry, did you want to respond?
I certainly.
Okay, 1 moment.
I think I certainly understand where you're coming from on this. When this was designed, when we put this bylaw together, it certainly was not kept in mind with the protest at all. But in light of recent events, I can understand.
Councilor Rapp?
I just have a comment that's, all it is a comment. I know in the spring and the fall, at least one rancher moves his cattle by foot through the town. And I think that's really cool, and that's one of the beauties of living in a small town like Turner Valley. That said, I don't live along the same road. I don't live in Sunset, so I might feel differently. And I don't think it should be in the bylaw. But is there any provisions made those days to clean up? Because there is some debris against this bylaw. I don't think it should be, but I've seen the odd little pile, little droppings, so, and it's too early for me to ever see it, I think it's cool though.
Cause it's been on the first page.
Through the CEO to the chair of council around. I agree. I got stuck behind it at 6:30 on Saturday morning and had to wash my car afterwards. That in mind, there are stipulations through the province where people do have to get permits for cattle drives on the primary highways. I can't comment on that. I'm not sure what the inner workings are. Unfortunately, I know in the past we have been given little or no notice when they're coming through, except for some trample grass and again, messy cars. So, I agree as part of the small town charm. What our avenues are on that is perhaps we talk to our neighbors and say, when you're coming through, let us know so we can ensure that we have somebody out there to clean up the mess.
Okay, so if there is nothing else on this bylaw, I think we'll look for a motion to bring forward to our, oh, sorry, one moment, I've got Heather waving at me.
So if you're going to the motion stage, I just wanna confirm that we've got, 2 amendments that you'd like to be completed. I think all the other questions were answered sufficiently. A definition of sidewalks, pathways to be added before it goes for first reading, and a change of the time for playgrounds from 7:30
To that point, Officer Bowman did state that he believes the sign already says 7:30, and I'm pretty confident the sign actually does say 7:30
yeah,
already.
in the bylaw it says.
But the bylaw says 8:30, right?
So, there'll be the 2 amendments that we would, change on the bylaw, am I correct?
Sorry, I just, one question, because it might relate to this, I'm not sure if it's something that got missed. Just on the designated truck routes, there was the schedule attached to the back and it has the map, and it's basically just Kennedy out past the Public Works shop and Main Street and the highway heading to Black Diamond. Is Sunset not a designated truck route then, and should that be included on that map?
Oh, cause it goes down the gas plant.
Through the CEO to the chair, to Councilor Lunke. I can advise right now, if you're talking about Sunset East or West.
West, heading west.
Okay, that's a provincial highway, there's already a truck route, it is a
Okay.
provincial highway. Therefore, it's, again, it's just like the 22 or the Sun, as a 3-digit highway. As far as Sunset East, down past Motorhead, I wouldn't recommend it, again, these are surface streets not built for heavy vehicles.
You never get a truck in there. You're turned around at the end, yeah.
No, they can do it, the problem is the hill at Veterans Way there, it's too steep, it just gets stuck.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we've got 2 amendments, as mentioned by Ms. Thompson. So we'd be looking for a motion to bring back to our July 20th meeting, with the amendments for first reading. One moment, okay, Mr. Sharp.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
Okay, I love that. What was that one more time?
You're absolutely right, Debbie.
Okay, so, any takers? Counselor Waring, I see you. All in favor? Okay. Did we get everybody there, all in favor?
Motion adoption 1 of the Governance and Priorities Committee recommends the Council consider giving first reading to Bylaw 20-1106 at the July 20th, 2020 summer business meeting, amended as discussed.
Great, thank you, but we already called for a vote.
I will add the amendments to the motion.
Thank you.
Amended as amended.
Amended as amended. Go ahead, Councilor Rob.
I think he's voting.
Yeah, I just have one comment to Councillor Wilkie. Yes, the additional truck route only shows Sunset going east, but if you look at page 59 of that document, is another diagram of truck route that includes Sunset going west. I believe that's also, it's in black letters, and I think it, as Councilwoman says, that is definitely, black. Found in Sunset West, page 59, second last page. Just FYI.
Okay. That's the old bylaw. That's
It is, yeah.
That's fine. I don't think so. If it's provincial, it's provincial.
Okay. Okay, so moving along to item 5.2, review community responsibility staff report and property responsibility bylaw. Will this be presented by Minette LeBlanc? Thank you.
Did we vote on the motion?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh, and we've got John too. And Cindy. Should we call again?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just call again. We're gonna, call to vote the motion as presented by Councillor Waring to bring back bylaw 20-1106 to the July 20th council meeting for first reading with the 2 amendments as mentioned. All in favor? I've got everybody except for Gary. And I've got Gary. Okay, all in favor. That's unanimous. Moving on.
Who put forward the motion?
Councillor Waring.
Thank you.
And sorry about that, Minette, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So this is the follow-up to a request by council directing administration to conduct a review of the property responsibility bylaw and the community standards bylaw, and then to be able to provide a report this evening. Most of these, as we stand right now, the property responsibility bylaw has some fairly good enforceability. However, we did find upon review that there were a number of gaps, and again, clarification of definitions that was required and alignments with other bylaws. So in the report, we're taking a deeper look at those items, and I will again ask my colleagues to be able to fill in some of the gaps. But currently, you may be aware that there is monitoring on a regular basis that goes on by our peace officers. Many of these are self-initiated, so they do a lot of drive-bys, notice that there may be some properties that are becoming unsightly, and then provide progressive warnings. From there, it can escalate into provincial orders and eventually court dates if needed, and certainly fines. However, we did find that there were some gaps in and around the definitions that didn't really address all of the potential situations. And those, for example, the inoperable vehicles could maybe be handled by the traffic parking control bylaw. Whereas here, we really needed to take a look at how that would be fairly applied locally and what some of the more common problems were, and if we were adequately able to deal with those. So the research was conducted looking at 6 other communities, and from there we selected really the best of what we found from those that would allow us to increase some of the enforceability, of course, after education. So there's always several steps that are taken before there's any fines applied, and certainly ample opportunity for a property owner, for example, to clean up the premises prior to any fines. So the most notable highlights would be, for consideration, were that we had to broaden the definition of the unsightly premises. The expansion also of the property owner responsibilities related to the control of weeds, grass, trees, and then also address the pests and smoke. So with the addition of cannabis into the community standards bylaw, then it also wasn't reflected necessarily enforceability on the property standards. Or the property responsibility. Also, just a few general things such as the removal of graffiti from the general property maintenance standards, and that's listed separately, a little bit easier to find and identify. Also, the definition of parking pad. So this one is, again, one of those that needs to be looked at once we get to the land use bylaw, and then be added in it for a definition. So without that, it's difficult to apply it. The there's a little bit more that we would be making recommendations into the land use bylaw that will help support this bylaw, but in the meantime, we felt that looking at it, there were substantial changes, that would actually require probably a redraft, enough to just, again, bring it up to current standards of bylaws, and that's what we're looking at. The authority to enforce is another key point, whereby it had been in council's hands, which could often take some time to be able to apply, and that has been, or it's recommended, that it be transferred to the CAO, so that would make it faster process, be able to act a lot more quickly to any of the complaints. And then the enforcement guidelines, I'd have to say that that's the largest and most significant change in all of this, where it really talks about setting the criteria for the expectation and responsibility of the community members, and also when we would apply these. So it defines what the expectations are, and it provides a lot of detail for both community members as well as our enforcement officers to understand clearly what it is that the standards would be. So based on this, we are recommending that bylaw 12-10-16, which is the current property responsibility bylaw, be replaced in its entirety with the revised version that you see attached as a draft. Also, it was felt that the community standards bylaw, which was recently amended in 18, because of the cannabis, the insertion of the cannabis rules and legal or legalities to it, that was sufficient, and in speaking to our bylaws, or in speaking to our municipal enforcement staff, felt that it was adequately applied at the moment, and they felt there was sufficient enforcement opportunities there. So as a result, this is what we're putting forward for discussion. And then again, I will call on Officer Bowman to be able to speak to any of the key highlights that might have been mentioned, or any of your questions.
If I could just add something regarding the addition of smoke to the property responsibility bylaw. That was not directed at cannabis, it was more so directed at people leaving smoldering fires, and that really stinks badly, so that kind of thing. So that was another
Excuse me, you
reason
keep breaking
to
up, I
add
can't
that
hear
section
anything,
to that.
Ms. Thompson was just making a clarification to the addition of smoke, that it wasn't necessarily for the cannabis related smoke, but more to smoldering or leaving fires to burn. Is that correct?
Yeah, the smell of it.
The smell or the odor from letting fires smolder.
But the whole conversation's been pretty broken, actually. So, it carry on, but it's not.
I haven't heard a thing, because I don't know whether it's the microphone or the position people are sitting in when they're talking. Because I notice particularly with Lana, when she's sitting, I can't hear her, but when she moves forward, I can. So I don't know whether it's microphones or people.
Okay, so what part of the conversation did you miss, John? Did you hear the last bylaw, or is it just recently?
Since we started this current conversation, I haven't understood a thing.
Were you guys able to hear the presentation by Monique LeBlanc?
No?
They haven't before.
I was able to hear Manette, but not Heather. But using earphones, I've discovered is kind of the key to hearing. It works better.
Deputy Mayor Hamilton, up until this point, all Ms. LeBlanc has done is summarize the report that council has in front of them. So if that's satisfactory to council, we could continue on. However, if you'd like Ms. LeBlanc to take it from the top, we can do that as well too.
You have the report here.
I'm good with carrying on, because I've read the documents and I understand the section that she was explaining. I don't have any questions about that. But after that, I couldn't hear anything. I'm not sure what people were talking about.
There was just a brief moment. There was just a brief moment when Ms. Thompson made a clarification regarding smoke on the bylaw, but she wasn't using a microphone, so I think that might have been the issue. So if we're okay with moving on, Monique was passing the floor over to Officer Bowman for comment, is that correct? Oh,
Actually, I was passing it over to council for any questions and just to offer up that both Ms. Thompson and Officer Bowman and myself may be able to answer those.
okay, thank you. So we'll open up to questions, council. Okay, Councillor Waring, and then I have Councillor Welke.
Okay, in section 4, weeds, grass and trees. Earlier on in the explanation of the changes, we referred to properties, whereas here we refer to owners of premises. So my question is, should this not be owners of properties and premises, because some properties don't have a house on them?
Through the CAO to the chair, to Council Ward. So in a definition of an owner of property or premises, this is a pretty robust definition. This includes any person who holds property, is recorded on the tax roll as a person who has, holding himself as powers or authority over ownership, who has a vested financial interest in that property. Whether a property has a dwelling on it or not is inconsequential. You are still an owner of that property and or premise. You could be a renter, you could be a house guesting over a weekend. You will be classified as the owner of that property and is responsible for that property.
Councillor Gordon also has a follow-up to that.
That's actually something, sorry. That's actually a really good point that Councilor Waring brings up. From a legal perspective, the premises is any land within the property line. And then your property has a slightly different definition, so it might be something worth clarifying in the two different bylaws, because that's quite specific. When you talk about premises, it's your property line. From your property line north, south, east, west, wherever that marker might be, that's considered premises. Property is slightly different, and then dwelling is a third definition altogether. So that might be something that just, we may want to clarify, just to make sure that we're absolutely specific on that.
Councillor Waring, were you complete with your question?
Yeah, my concern on this is, for example, if somebody buys a piece of land for development or whatever, and then sits on it for 20 years, and we know how that happens, but in the meantime, they don't do anything at all about maintaining the property into a reasonable visual, and also they don't do weed control or grass cutting or prune trees or anything else. I was once told when I complained about an area that they didn't have a house on it, so they didn't have to do it, and that was an official reply from administration. So when I read the introduction to this section, it referred to property, not just premises. That's why I'm asking for the clarification. So if we're saying that premise or property means exactly the same thing, I'm fine with it. But as Councillor Gordon has just pointed out, maybe it doesn't.
So that's something that I'm getting a head shake here from CAO Sharp that they can make that amendment to the definitions. Councillor Welke.
Also just focused on the weeds, grass, trees, and pests. I noticed that dandelions is a new addition that wasn't in there before, and I know there are very wide variety of opinions on dandelions and their control and removal. Just curious on the thought process around that. I know some people are dead set against their removal. I have somebody who comes and sprays stuff and takes care of it for me, but it can be a bit of a headache, especially with some of the wild areas around town. It's just a never-ending battle here. So, curious what the thought process was.
Unfortunately, I'm not a weed expert. I do know that dandelions are no longer considered a noxious weed in Alberta, or prohibited weed in Alberta. Therefore, they're not required to be controlled by any means. As far as on people's property, again, they can't be controlled under law. And again, we have quite a few open green spaces where the municipality would be responsible then for also controlling dandelions on their own property. If this is something that a policy would wanna be addressed, that might be something, but again, most municipalities right now are not addressing dandelions on public or private property, just for the simple fact they are no longer controlled in prohibited weed in Alberta.
Just to follow up on that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we do have it in 4.2A, we specifically list dandelions as not being allowed on the property.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would throw it to council on people's opinions on that, whether we include that or do not include it, I think. I guess there is some discretion involved, but.
Okay, go ahead, Barry, and then I see you, John.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's been declassified. I think it really is a bit of a personal preference. I mean, there's some people who don't care and pluck it and make wine and eat the roots. And others have McKellops who do a fantastic job for great money and clean up every weed in your yard. So I'd be fine with removing it. And then it is a personal preference of the property owner, really. If it's been declassified by province, then we really shouldn't have it in there if it's not legit anymore. That's my thought anyway, but good follow-ups, we'll keep.
Okay, so, Todd, are you responding to that?
No,
No.
You're
I don't have a response at this.
Is that mic on?
Okay, so maybe we can have administration look into that as well, to bring back, if it is.
I got a comment.
I guess I could respond, Deputy Mayor Hamilton, in the fact that we've got a standard in the unsightly property bylaw that talks about anything more than 15, is it inches or centimeters?
It should be 15 centimeters.
15 centimeters. But like Mayor Crane had said, really, it's about standards, right? It's what one person's standard is versus the other person's standard is. Really, it's a constant battle. I know from a Parks and Recreation perspective, there's never consensus, and of course, we try to hold ourselves to a standard that we can also maintain. So leaving it in or taking it out, I guess I'd be curious to hear the rest of council's thoughts on that. As to whether it's something that's enforceable or you think that well, that's a question for Officer Bowman, whether it's enforceable, but feeling on council as to whether we need to have mention of that in the bylaw or not.
Okay, so, I'll go, John, I see you, I'm just gonna go to Officer Bowman, and then I'll come to you.
If I may, just offer some information here, is what I've seen work in other municipalities is because dandelions grow at such a rapid rate compared to other weeds, is in putting a standard in which a 15 centimeter length of weeds or grass that covers pretty well everything. If it gets to that point, then it must be cut. It can't get any longer than that. And it being, if you have a field full of dandelions, they are going to grow at such an extent compared to regular grass and regular weeds. They'll reach that 15 centimeters fairly quickly. Therefore, they can be combined with all the other grasses and weeds on properties and be cut at that 15 centimeter length.
Okay, John, go ahead, and then Barry, did you have your hand up? Okay, so John, then Barry,
My
and then Cindy.
personal feeling on dandelions is we're living in a rural area with a huge number of fields all the way around us. To try to control dandelions is basically a waste of money. If you cut in your lawn once a week, that'll clear it up as much as anything. Rather than, I mean, to
So, to leave it in or take it out, I guess really, I kind of like the fact that 15 centimeter, you know, that is addressing an unsightly property, really. Any weed that gets higher, you gotta cut, a mowed lawn looks good. So really, if it's in or out, it's not gonna matter if you're sticking to maintaining the sightliness of the property by mowing it regularly. So, yeah, it could stay or go, but it is futile, as every land around us is covered in them. So, and the bees can live. So, Councilor Waring's correct. Let the bees live.
Councillor Holiday.
Yeah, I'm, I guess, approaching it from the urban reserve perspective. There's just no way. I mean, horses love them and bees love them, and a lot of people have big issues about pesticide. Like, I won't let my husband spray as much as he would like to because I don't want the, you know, and I think for kids and dogs to be running through, it's better for everybody. So I'd like to see the dandelions removed, and maybe some clarification on urban reserve. I don't know if there's many other like us, you know, when you talk about in section 4.1E about removing dead brush. I mean, we've got a whole river full of dead brush coming along these properties on this side. So I think there needs to be, I'm assuming that there's going to be some discretion on us that don't have normal town properties in implementing this, but I'd like dandelions taken out.
Go ahead, Councillor Gordon.
You know, it's interesting because we're looking at the unsightly property, right? And I understand that dandelions are no longer classified as noxious. I know the bees and the bears and the horses love them, but man, when I played sports and a field had dandelions on it, that was a pain to get tackled and hit on that. It dries the land, it makes little mounds, it twists ankles. It's just something that I don't mind it in there because it does give us the element that it's unsightly. I know we're mowing it at 15 centimeters, but for me, it meets the intent of the actual policy that it is an unsightly element. That's my opinion.
Go ahead, Councillor Holiday.
The schoolyard is one that would have complete problems because FSD, I'm pretty sure, won't spray for dandelions, nor do I think that they would want to spend the staff time picking them out manually. I think we have to be careful there because you would have a lot of parents up in arms if school playgrounds are being sprayed with chemicals to get rid of dandelions. So, just another thing to consider.
Okay, are there any other comments, or I can put my 2 cents in here? I'm kind of a neat freak when it comes to lawns and green spaces, so I think you know where I stand on dandelions. I think that there's a balance here. Some spaces, definitely, you know, urban reserve schoolyards. I think that those kind of maybe there's exceptions there to be made, but personally, I think that they do fall under the unsightly property bylaw, and council's working very hard to make Turner Valley a desirable place to start a business and make Turner Valley a desirable place to bring a family, and part of that is making it aesthetically pleasing. I would like administration to come back with the Noxious Weed Act information and see if it actually is listed as a noxious weed. It's not. Okay, Todd is shaking his head, it's not. Okay, so I guess, do we vote on that as a council, or we just wait to bring it back?
Council will from what we're hearing, we'll remove dandelions from the bylaw, and council have an opportunity to vote on first, second, and third reading. I don't think we need anything unanimous here this evening. It's a conversation, and we're picking up on what the pulse of council is as far as where we go, and ultimately, if there's a big debate on dandelions after first or second reading, we're gonna find out, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions, with the bylaw from council?
Is there a definition for non-competitive?
It's in the act.
Go ahead, Jamie,
Sorry, was that for other questions in general on the bylaw?
on this bylaw, yeah, we're moving on from weeds, but it's gonna be removed by administration to be voted on for first reading.
Okay, the other question that I had was around, 13.2, just the right of entry provisions. I do see that dwelling house is accepted, I assume that that's for legal reasons. Is that kind of a standard, I guess just looking for some insight into how your day-to-day goes, Officer Bowman, on, are you normally permitted the ability to enter into a premises for inspection? So in this case, the outside of the property, walk into somebody's backyard if you need to.
So in this case, when it comes to property inspections, most are done through, just visually outside the property line. It's not very often we have concerns regarding, inside property where we don't have visual reference. And that's where we can run into problems also, is we'll get a complaint regarding a backyard. However, we can't see into the backyard, so we require the complainant to take a picture. And if they forward that picture and results in a prosecution, that complainant now has to come to court and verify that they took this picture, this is what the backyard looked like, and authenticate that photograph for the purposes of prosecution. Unfortunately, a lot of people do not want to get heavily involved, and when you explain to them that we're basing our orders and our notices on what's reasonable and probable, that we can see, but if we can't see it legally, we have to rely on that. And if they don't want to get involved, basically the file stops there. In certain cases, there are stipulations under the MGA under emergency situations where we can enter onto a property, whether it's a risk to personal or public safety, but not usually for enforcement purposes. Again, if we're going to be entering onto a property, there's other options available to us, such as warrants that we apply to the courtsman.
Okay. Just to follow up on that.
Go ahead.
I guess, how would that be managed? And look, I have no, concern about you just wandering into my backyard, but that is something that I'm definitely sensitive to, is property rights. You know, what would be the process whereby you would exercise that right, I guess, and what would be any limitations, placed upon that right? And I guess, do we need to worry about that in this case, or is it sort of seen as public property? If I can jump and look over the fence, there's no problem with that whatsoever. I'm just sensitive to the issue and appreciate any expansion on it.
I can advise that I share the belief that a person's product, like their house is their kingdom. And our goal here is not to be, I'm trying to think of the right wording for it, but it's certainly not to be sneaking around people's properties and along those lines. This is complaint based, and if it's in a property where it's not visual, it is complaint based. This is nothing where we go tripping through back alleys late at night looking for properties that are in contravention of the bylaw. If we get a complaint, we'll work with the owners, educate the owners, and if it gets to the point where we require the assistance of the complainant and they're willing to follow through, we have no problem taking the file all the way through. It's just we need to be financially and fiscally responsible, as we pay for our own crown prosecutor, where if there's no reasonable expectation of a conviction, why would we follow through with it? And if a complainant isn't willing to get involved and assist us in that prosecution, then there's not much we can do to help them. They need to be part of the solution themselves. And when it comes to people's property, it's, again, complaint based, and we do need to enter a property for an emergency circumstance, such as a gas leak or anything else. There is legislation in the MGA that allows us to do that, and we're there strictly for that. We're not on a fishing expedition.
Yep. Just one more Sorry. No, I appreciate that perspective, and I think that's, you know, exactly what I would expect in this situation. Would you foresee then, under this bylaw that we're enacted this way, that you're, before it ever got to that stage where you had to enter somebody's property to inspect something, you're going to have contact with that property owner before that it ever got to that point then, right? And they would, at that point, you would be able to advise them that, look, under the bylaw, I am technically permitted to enter to inspect. Just, is that how you would normally see things going first, that the property owner would be first point of contact?
Absolutely, the property, that's the first person we contact. It wouldn't become any surprise at all.
Yeah.
We would ask for permission to access the property. If they refuse to, at that point, there are other options available to us. I believe it's section 542 of the Municipal Government Act. We provide legal notice to the property owner that we are going to be entering upon the property, not into a dwelling, to conduct an inspection. The property owner at that point can refuse access still. Our recourse then is going to the Provincial Court of Alberta to get a writ of entry for that property then. And at that point, the property owner can appear in court and voice his concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Holiday?
Yeah, just, errors, we go from 11 to section 13 on that, I think, did you, on this, and then, on 13.1, that first sentence there has, third line down, erection of any king, as well as I think there's an error in the shall permit and building structure. I think there's some errors there, just something we're gonna, they'll probably get cleaned up later, but.
13 what?
It goes 11 to 13, back to 12.
Yeah, we go from section 11 to section 13, and then, yeah, we have a king in there.
Did you guys, are you looking at the most recent link
That's
that
right here.
was sent? Oh, mine goes 11, 12, 13.
I think it should be anything, not any king.
It's the number.
Yeah,
I see it.
yeah. Page 10 of the bylaws,
Mine says
I think it's 149.
13.
13 should be 12. I'll
That
correct
page
that.
11 turns into 13 as well, but it's listed
Okay, we
12
got
as
it.
enforcement,
We
so
get
it's just a switch.
Yeah. I got it.
Just to
Oh,
clarify.
there, yeah, there's a 12 underneath enforcement, yeah. Right, but yeah, just double check that first sentence on 13.1, and yeah, I didn't notice that, yeah, it's a 12 and a 13,
Thank you.
numbering.
Good.
Direct the king.
The trouble is, I read it as anything and didn't notice it.
That's so
Yeah,
we can have that procession.
my only substance comment, was graffiti, the penalties on that, to me, I think graffiti is horrific, especially with getting pictures that were sent me email the other day, that I'd like to see bigger penalties for that, but maybe, I don't know if anybody else feels the same way.
Sure, cut off the left hand. I hate graffiti.
These are pretty basic, aren't they?
You should pay the cost of the cleanup.
Officer Bowman, did you want to comment on that?
I certainly can. To the CEO, to the chair, and members of council. It's important to note that this is a late draft bylaw, this is in its infancy. When looking at certain sections of this bylaw, the penalties involved here, from an enforcement point of view, depending on the circumstances, we don't necessarily have to issue a fine to a person who's charged under this bylaw. What we can do is issue a summons and let the judges decide based on the totality of the circumstances, what a appropriate punishment would be. I believe in provincial court right now, the fines can go up as high as $10,000. So just because there is a fine here and based on the circumstances, if we don't feel it's appropriate or it's continually offense, we can summons that person to court and bring all that information into evidence and let the judge make the final decision. So again, this bylaw is still in its infancy. There are a number of tweaks that still need to be done with it. However, fines, when we research our fines, we look at our adjacent municipalities and what's reasonable for them. There is a big difference from somebody destroying a bench to writing something on a bathroom wall and down at the Flare and Derrick, where we need to be reasonable and keep in mind who we're dealing with. And granted, not all fines are gonna fit each person the right way.
Okay, other questions? I've got one, if council's good.
I've got another one, but you can go ahead.
You go ahead, Jamie, I'll go last, go ahead.
I know the chair likes to save that last word, so we'll let you do that. Just the question was around particulate emissions and smoke in particular, and it's more to clarify intent, I guess. I just want to be clear that the intent of this is not to sort of ban or outlaw campfires in any regard. It's really just, don't have a damp piece of, bad wood on the fire that's just creating a smoke show. Is that the idea here? I'm correct?
Yes, that would be correct, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just don't burn the tires this weekend, do you?
Pallets burn clean though, so that's fine. Stack 6 of them up here.
Okay, I had questions regarding the recommendation of review of the land use bylaw for recommended parking pads, driveways, and secondary parking. I'm just wondering why we're going that avenue and we're not mentioning parking on lawns with, such as utility trailers, travel trailers, vehicles in the property responsibility bylaw. I think that we're missing out here. That's definitely, I think, covered under unsightly. So just wondering if I could get some feedback on that.
Yes, ma'am. So when we looked at this, parking vehicles on lawns, granted, it is unsightly. However, when we looked at this, we said, okay, you cannot park your vehicle on your lawn. Okay, well, we have to look at the big picture here also. The big picture of meeting this is how much of our land use bylaw do we allow, how much of our frontage of each property has to be landscaped. And if I have a 30-foot trailer and I don't have a parking pad for it, I'm gonna put a parking pad on my property. But there's nothing stopping someone from making their entire front yard a giant parking pad and taking away from their appearance to their neighbors, who probably has a really nice lawn. But if we look at the parking pad, what is it gonna be made of? We need to look at parking pads that are concrete, aggregate, pavement, or gravel, and how much of that property can be a driveway. There's nothing worse than somebody they have 3 or 4 cars and decide, well, I'm gonna lay pavement across my entire front lawn and park every vehicle I have on top of it now. There needs to be checks and balances in place, or we're gonna end up grandfathering people in, and you will never, their property will be completely turned or concreted over, and you'll never get rid of it.
My response to that would be the building code stipulates how much of a property cannot be developed by deck, concrete structure. So I think that maybe by the time this comes back for first reading, that I would appreciate really if administration could look into that, and also look into Calgary's regulations. It speaks to frontage, the vehicle, like recreational vehicles either being parked in the back or side yards not being directly out the front door or in the direct view or side view of neighboring properties. The way this bylaw is written, people could set up temporary structures on their front lawns, they could set up a bouncy house on their front lawns and leave it there all year. They could park 10 vehicles on it, the list goes on and on. So I think what we're taking the time to review an unsightly property bylaw, that we would also take the time to try to catch something that really could be open-ended. Like, use your imagination, you can really put anything on your front lawn in Turner Valley right now. So I would really appreciate if administration could look into, you know, fellow or neighboring communities, Calgary in particular, and also, into the building codes for Alberta, cause it's a percentage, and I believe it's 40%, I could be wrong, but I believe 40% has to be undeveloped. Heather, did you wanna come to a mic, Heather, so that the gallery at home can hear you?
I can scoot over here, Charlie.
Said that was on the wrong seat.
Additional parking paths are not addressed by building codes. So this is what we need to look at for, in our land use bylaw, to apply, a definition of what a additional parking pad is, because we do have residential, you have to supply so many parking spaces with your building permit, your driveway, for example, but there's nothing in our land use bylaw that identifies additional besides your parking pads that goes with your permit. So that's what needs to be looked at in the land use bylaw. What size, what they can be made of, and the percentage that you're allowed to use of your lot. And that could be side yard or whatever, but that has to be defined in the land use bylaw, and you would have to get a development permit to do it. So that's what we did look into it, and so that's why we're suggesting that the land use bylaw has to contain that. As far as bouncy houses and stuff like that, that's a little tricky because it is private property, and if that's where the trick comes into unsightly. What might be unsightly to you may not be unsightly to me. I totally
That's awful.
I totally understand where you're coming from, totally understand it, and we can do some more research into it and look at other municipalities. But when it comes to unsightly and bouncy houses and all that, that's a little trickier, but we certainly can define additional parking pads and have development permits for that.
Stipulate where they go.
Well, my comment or my question doesn't even have to do with parking pads. Currently, right now, this bylaw, this unsightly bylaw, doesn't reference parking on lawns. That would be more the issue. I think that looking at parking pads in the land use bylaw is a great idea, but I think the point of this would be to look at, you know, trailer storage or vehicle storage or motorbike storage on lawns. I think that this would be the perfect place for it. We're not talking about on parking pads, we're talking about not on parking pads.
I'm gonna hand this over to Trevor, cause we've had this
So-
conversation.
So I think we can look into it, and when I say bouncy house, I don't mean like a single bouncy house, I mean like you could put a 4-story kingdom on your front lawn right now, like the ones that we use for Discovery Days, and there's nothing speaking in our bylaws against that, and I think that there was we were getting complaints about temporary structures, like temporary garages going up on front lawns and being used for parking. Again, there's nothing
That's gotta go in the
there's
land.
nothing in this bylaw saying that that is not allowed. So, well, I think that the land use bylaw is the perfect place to address parking pads and additional parking. I think parking on lawns or front yards is what I'm thinking should be in this
Right,
bylaw.
I just was trying to explain the reasoning behind things. So, I'll let Trevor take over about parking on lawns, I'm not 100% sure. We can do some more research, but I'll let Trevor take over from here.
One thing I would point out in this bylaw right now, is you need to clarify all vehicles cannot park on lawns. Right now, it says, disassembled vehicles, surplus damage, along those lines. There's a big difference between a 72 pickup and an $80,000 F-350 sitting on your lawn. We can't differentiate between them. A vehicle's a vehicle. The bylaw itself right now says it's inoperative, disregard removing parts, age, stat, or otherwise. A vehicle's a vehicle. We can't penalize somebody because of the vehicle they own. That's not fair to them. is if we're gonna put, you can't park on your lawn, you can't park anything on your lawn. There's nothing stopping somebody right now from parking a $60,000 fifth wheel on their lawn that's in beautiful shape. We can't differentiate or discriminate against somebody who wants to put a little dinky trailer on their lawn. What's good for one has to go for everybody else. And the bylaw-
I'm not saying that you should be able to park your $60,000 fifth wheel, I'm saying you shouldn't be able to park any vehicle.
No, exactly, but the
Yeah.
bylaw right, our current bylaw right now, and what we're looking at, it says it has to be removed parts due to age or damage, or otherwise not roadworthy or in a functioning condition. It's not, it has to cover everything. And when we looked at this bylaw, is we wanted to make sure that when people turn around, when they say, okay, I'm gonna park my vehicle on my lawn, but I have to have a parking pad. Okay, what's the parking pad gotta be made out of? That's gonna come under the land use bylaw. How much of my frontage of my property can I pave and make that parking pad? I'm not a land use, expert, I'm not sure what the land use bylaw in Turner Valley, what the frontage percentage is. My goal here is to ensure that we're not having people paving their entire front yard and parking 7 vehicles on it and calling it a parking pad because it meets the definition. I'm trying to get, I don't wanna get to the point where people are grandfathered in and we'll never get rid of those parking pads because they're grandfathered in. Is, we need to set how much of the front of the property can be a parking pad and what that parking pad has to be made out of. And if there's a development permit involved in it. At that point then, anything that's not parked on a parking pad, or an approved parking pad, under the land use bylaw, definitely cannot be there, and that can be stipulated in the unsightly bylaw. Vehicles must be parked on an appropriate parking pad. So,
Go ahead, Todd.
I just wanted to maybe add a little clarification to what I think I'm hearing Officer Bowman saying. He's saying, if we go one before the other, so if we are really strict in the unsightly property bylaw right now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna drive a whole bunch of vehicles up onto the front lawn. We're gonna drive residents to bring those vehicles up onto the front lawn, and we don't have a mechanism to prevent that yet. There's a loophole in the land use bylaw.
Well, not really, cause you need a permit, so those would come to MPC. There's not a loophole.
Not yet. There's nothing in the land use bylaw yet.
Right.
Well, there is in building code, you can't just go pour concrete on your front property. You have to, a certain amount of every property needs to be undeveloped.
I'm sorry, I can't hear a thing.
I'm saying that
Way too many line microphones and live devices on council chambers, and all we're getting is interference here and whistling.
Okay, so Todd is saying that we're going to, without addressing it in the land use bylaw, that we're going to have people, or creating their entire front yards in concrete. But what I'm saying is that there are mechanisms in place for that not to happen. In order to develop property in Alberta, a certain portion of each property needs to be undeveloped space, needs to be lawn, needs to be frontage, side yard, everything. So I'm asking administration to look to that. To me, parking pads and getting permits for them and parking vehicles on your lawn are two very different things. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one on council that feels this way and I should just drop it and address it when we vote. But I would like council to do administration to do some research into it before we vote on it. So Barry's got his finger up. Go ahead, Barry.
I support everything you're saying, Len, and I think there are some mechanisms in place that with the 40-30 split for parking and lawn, guaranteed to be covered in architectural controls. And there is that element that Officer Bowman's talking about that falls into land use 100%. I think we just need to make sure it's clear as day in this bylaw that it's referenced clearly that you cannot just willy-nilly park everything, yada yada yada. I don't think we'll get a rush of people going to get parking pads right away. I think our land use bylaw in the next year will get done. It'll incorporate it, but I think it needs to be clearly pointed out, number one. And I know for a fact that under architectural controls, there's a clear definition for each subsection of town, as you see on Facebook and on that one, incorporate that same type of thought, say, no, you're restricted to one trailer, that's it, and it has to meet the square footage criteria of your front lawn X, and so on. So however we tie it in, as long as it's referenced in here clearly, so when it comes to unsightly and a complaint comes in, we'll say right here, it says one trailer, square footage, yada yada, and it's right here in the land use bylaw to align with it, end of story. So, I support everything you're saying. I think there's some more work and background information that can be added. So maybe it's not 100% where we want, but it'll get there, so.
Okay. I've got John Waring and then Cindy Holiday.
Reaching back into my, few years ago when I was on the MPC, and I was on the MPC a long time before I was on council. My understanding is that the size of the dwellings on the property must not exceed a certain percentage. I was going to say it's 60%, but I'm not going to stick to a number. It doesn't really matter.
70, I guess.
And then outbuildings, I think, could be an extra 15% or something. But I don't remember ever there being a definition that you have to have a law. Because with zero landscaping and all these other things, I mean, people can do what the heck they like with their garden. It's just the amount of building. So if somebody's got a driveway and they don't want a little narrow strip of grass next to it, they concrete it across it, I don't think that's going against the bylaw in any shape or form. Sorry, I've got a little bit off it, but I'm with you on this idea of not allowing anything to be stored on your lawn, as in broken down vehicles, even parking vehicles. I mean, you park your things where you're supposed to park. If you've got space down the side of your house and you can put a vehicle, an RV or something down the side of your house and not interfere with your neighbours, I believe that's allowed in most communities. But I don't like the idea of having things parked in front, whether it's on their driveway or on their grass.
Okay, so we've got Cindy, Councillor Wilkie, and then Councillor Roth. Go ahead, Councillor Holiday.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I don't like seeing stuff parked on the grass. It doesn't make sense in town. And you did bring up a good point. One I wanted to touch on was the temporary garages. There's one that I drive by quite often that particularly annoys me. Normally a garage has to have a setback of 20, I think it's 20 feet, just under, in the land use bylaw. So if someone sets up a temporary garage, you would think that that would still be considered a garage and it would have to have a setback of the 20 feet in front of the property line. So I think that we have the mechanism, we just haven't been enforcing that one. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe those temporary garage shelter things aren't considered real garages, I don't know, but I would like a way to enforce something on that, because they look terrible parked out right along the street in the front yard.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Go ahead, Councillor Wilkie.
I think one of the issues we're running into here, right, is correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that a driveway, like a parking pad on your property, requires a development permit at the moment. And I think that's the issue that we're running into, right? So if we were to tell people, so the question is, how do you word it in the unsightly bylaw, right? If we word it as, you cannot park a vehicle on grass in front of your house. If I'm a person who wants to get around the rules, well, I'm just gonna go out and throw down some gravel on my front yard, or just go out and round up the whole thing and get rid of all my grass, right? And I can, well, there's a perfect example. I don't even have to put gravel down. If I did need gravel for or if I needed a development permit for gravel, I can just go round up the whole front lawn, right? So I agree with the spirit. I think I see where we're running into the issue with the land use bylaw, is that we don't require permits in that case, right? So I guess I'd love administration to come back, just sharpen up the pencil on it a little bit and give some more thought to, can we address that specifically in here in any way without having the full land use bylaw done? Because I agree with the spirit that you don't park vehicles on your front lawn, but I also see that there's complications here, so.
Thank you, Jamie. Councillor Rob?
I agree, I agree with you, Lana, and everybody else sort of piggybacked on that, so we need to do a little bit more work on this as far as unsightly. And I also agree with Councillor Holiday about a tent just down the road, or whatever you call it, it's right to the street, so it doesn't look the prettiest, so. Anyway, maybe it needs a bit more work.
Okay, are there any other comments in any other sections of the property responsibility bylaw as presented? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Holiday.
Yeah, I just wonder on, I guess, what we're trying to prevent is people from parking RVs in front of the main section of their house, in front of their, their front-facing windows, their doorways. In front of a garage, doors is fine, or on the side of a house, alongside if they've got a wider setback on one of their sides is fine, but I don't know if there's a way we could word it so it's not blocking, the windows and the front entries of the house. If that might be a way around it, but I'll let admin figure something out, but I think that there might be some solution if we get creative.
The City of Calgary bylaw speaks to that, Councillor Holiday, and it's the way that it's worded is the frontage. It can't exceed the frontage of the house is the way that their bylaw is written. Maybe that's a little extreme for Turner Valley area. Maybe we need to be a little more relaxed than that, but that was one that I had looked at anyway recently. Any other comment? Okay, so I guess we'll look for a motion.
Deputy Mayor Hamilton, I won't make the motion, but I just want to clarify. So I've noted 4 things. I've noted that we need to better define property, premises, dwelling, and the definitions of this. We're going to remove dandelions, the section we discussed about dandelions. We are going to take a look at some wording that we can beef up this particular bylaw around unsightly in the front yard with vehicles. And just to also note that we still need to put this through legal review as well too. We ran out of time prior to GPAC in order to do that second review. So those would be the 4 things that we would be working on.
And the numbering.
In the house.
That would just automatically.
But those would be the 4 things that would affect the intent of the bylaw that we would be bringing back as amendments for first reading.
One more thing, Todd. Include grass height of 15 centimeters.
We work on to do the rewrite, I can work at it. Don't worry about that.
Grass height.
Okay, did everybody at home get those amendments that we're looking for first reading? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Holiday.
Yeah, we're not removing the section on dandelions, we're just removing the word dandelions from that section, right, to be clear?
Right.
Okay.
Councillor Holiday, are you making a motion? Okay, so Councillor
Yeah,
Holiday
I'll make that motion.
has made the motion, that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommends that administration prepare bylaw 20-1107 following the legal review for council's consideration of first reading at the July 20th summer business meeting with amendments as noted. Any other comments? Okay, so we'll call for a vote. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Does everybody need a brief break? Should we take a recess? Can I get a motion? Councillor Rob. Motion for recess at 8:48. We'll do 5 minutes.
I just took one, by the way.
What?
Are we still streaming?
I've taken 2 already.
So I think, we're
Okay.
still streaming, so.
Okay, so Gary, so when I was, at the council meeting the other night on Monday night, I think it was, I was really struggling to hear. I was having a really difficult time. Is it just really quiet and tinny? Is that what you're hearing?
We can't even hear you.
Whatever, Gary.
It seems, Lana, when you're up
So are you-
to the microphone where you're at now, you can hear it, but if you sit back in your chair and relax, it fades away real fast.
Try to put the mic more in front of you.
It's fine, as long as it's locked, it's fine.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I could hear, Todd clear as a bell, I could hear Trevor clear as a bell, and you most of the time, but then Manek was, I had trouble with Manek, and I had trouble with, Heather, and when Heather spoke, I was getting lots of whistling, so I think there was too many devices on maybe, so I think that either that or somebody was whistling Heather, perhaps, I don't know, but I kinda think that there was some, interference in somebody else's. Yes, I can see you move too, Todd, I can see you, I can hear fine.
Yeah, I was whistling Dixie there.
There was Jonathan.
It could be that Heather's just too far away, she's sitting in the back, that's probably what it is. Right?
Okay.
Good night, Minik.
Good night, Manek, thank you. Alright. I'm ready to fight about dandelions.
We only need about 10 more minutes, guys. I think the next one's fairly straightforward, just so.
There's a reason dandelions are in there, cause it is, if they take over a lawn, that's unsightly, even at half an inch.
So,
I can see why it's in there.
yeah, we can start to cherry pick certain things that we wanna make sure are in there or taken out, but the general premise of unsightly is anything you're doing or not doing with your yard that detracts from the general theme or aesthetics of the
Yeah.
neighborhood, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Which, that's the bottom.
that's the bottom line,
Well,
right?
yeah, big time. But I really think that parking pads, you can't just go pour a parking pad and take up 100% of your yard and curb. You can't do that.
What I was suggesting is when people,
It's a game, you can't do it.
when people wouldn't do it,
Yeah,
they just park on the
No, you
lawn.
can't, John.
there's nothing in the land use bylaw that says you can't.
Well, I don't know if there is or there isn't, but there's definitely, when you can't just pour concrete all over your property. It's in the, what's it called?
Well, the land use bylaw talks about coverage of your property.
Yeah, the land use bylaw is where the 70% is, John.
Hey, Jamie,
But I don't think it triggers
Right,
as a
so that was only
it
buildings.
doesn't.
No,
Structures.
it includes structures.
Even a garage doesn't.
Yeah, cause you
In
can
Turner
technically
Valley, you
build
can
it.
put you can build a garage without a garage.
I think in the case of the building, MPC,
You can build.
I think you're allowed 40% of your property being covered with buildings, whether it be the house or garage. I know the same thing's true in Candle Lake, cause I'm right at 40%. But I don't know what the rule is on the front yards. And if you look at that little cul-de-sac across from the school on the north side, they have that very narrow front and a real wide back. They're all pie-shaped lots. So I don't know, I mean, you can cover that whole front end pretty quickly, I think. And I'm not sure what the land use bylaw says, so I guess we'll find out.
Jamie, you're talking about ticketing Henry for his quad. So we had, when I was 12, no, I think I was 11.
Yeah.
My brother Joel was 12. We had a little mini bike, Tecumseh mini bike, right?
Yeah.
So we're bombing around Tuxedo Park on this thing, you know. I kid you not, a Calgary police officer with his lights on comes bombing.
Lights and sirens, yeah.
Comes bombing behind us. Oh man, we nearly wet ourselves. We're like,
They just give you the finger wag?
oh no, he got out of his car.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a rather interesting talking
Yeah.
to.
We don't take it out on the highway anyway, but apparently everything's on.
Is there, I don't know, but if you look up, when I did my Google search, look up trailer parking. And it's
That's always
somewhere,
fun.
yeah, recreational trailer parking, where you can and can't.
Bear, are you home or you
And
camping?
and there's
What's
nothing
next?
too restrictive.
adjusted their advertising bylaw that would prevent them from having to advertise certain things in the newspaper. And they could go to their website, for example, or more
Yeah.
common areas. It's gonna save them $350,000 a year.
Can you imagine?
Now, Calgary Herald wasn't very happy, but,
Yeah, I guess not, right?
but,
People still advertise in newspapers.
yeah, we're still one turn of the wheel away, you know, there's still a generation out there that doesn't own computers.
Oh, yeah, I know. I think, yeah, to me, the big thing is it's on the sign, if it's on the, yeah.
Yeah.
It's on your social media.
Social media, though, I think you're gonna get, I've pulled back from it a lot of people are
We're gonna, what do I say? We're gonna come back to our regular meeting at 8:56. And we are on to item 5.3, review of advertising bylaw 20-1101. Mr. Sharp, are you presenting on this?
Actually, no, Ms. Thompson
Oh.
will, I'll just give her a chance to set herself up there and then I'll bring her to the microphone.
Great, thank you.
Section 606(1)(2). We also have to have a public hearing on this bylaw, so, it would go to first reading and then we would set a public hearing date. And that's just to guarantee that there's that we actually are substantially hitting the majority of the public. So what we have to consider is our seniors that don't access website and things like that. So even cutting it down to one full notice in the Western Wheel, versus, two, and the notice could actually be squashed down to direct people to the website. But what I'm suggesting is that one full notice would go in and then be directed to the website in the bylaw. So, we'll have to, do a public hearing notice, of course, in the Western Whale for 2 consecutive weeks to go along with the public hearing rules, because we haven't passed our bylaw yet. We make all our bylaws available for public viewing. All our bylaws are posted on the Civic Web portal. So it's a very short, simple bylaw. Are there any questions?
Council? Any questions?
Short and sweet.
Okay, I have one quick one.
Sure.
Is that if we're going to be removing one of our weeks of newspaper notice, is it possible to put notification on our signboard? Because then at least as people are moving through town, they can see that there is a.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did include that we could put it on our electronic signboard. I thought I did.
Oh, I can't see that. Maybe I missed it.
I remember seeing it somewhere.
I think that got mixed in with the website.
I don't see it on here.
I can add that.
Great.
That it could, notices can go on our electronic signboard. However, we can't do the full notice. We direct
Yeah.
to our website, so,
Mhm.
cause we're limited on the amount that we can put on there.
Okay, go ahead, Mayor Crane.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me, my computer is now updating, so I can't even read it. Does the MGA, is it kosher with that? Because I know the MGA states that public hearings have to be done in such and such a fashion, for public notice. So is there no conflict there?
No,
Nope.
no, that's why we're
Didn't
creating a
change.
bylaw.
Right.
So the MGA changed to allow this, so that we could have an advertising bylaw.
Okay.
What did I? Yeah, October 26, 2017, the regulation changed so that we could, put into place an advertising bylaw that would limit to, only having to advertise, electronically, but what I'm suggesting is we don't go down totally to electronic, because that would not get substantially all of our residents. That it be advertised at least once in the local newspaper, the full public notice.
I don't want to sound like a negative Nancy, but I'm actually quite fine leaving it in the paper for 2 weeks, and the digital media portion would be like the extra.
Costly.
That's just me. I like reading the paper still, so.
So you'll still be able to read it.
Go ahead, Councillor Wilkie.
Your mic.
Oh, sorry.
I like newspapers too. They go directly from my front step into the recycling bin, so they're extremely useful to me. I know that's not everybody, so I appreciate that we're still covering off most people. I just wanted to mention on the electronic signboard and also on things like social media, I think we may be better actually staying silent in the bylaw, because there's nothing to prevent us from advertising on the signboard. And my only concern is that if we write it into the bylaw and all of a sudden the signboard gets hit by a semi-truck and we don't replace it, now we're stuck having to buy a signboard or something, right? So I think I'm okay with it being an optional kind of issue, but I think it's, when I look at these, the newspaper, the website, to me that covers off the required things, and those are probably gonna be around forever, so. I don't know about newspapers.
Yeah, as a follow-up, I'll do one better than Councillor Wilkie. Newspapers for me are a great fire starter. And so I'm actually, I wouldn't mind going completely digital on this. I know we have a handful of a good number of residents who may rely on the newspaper, but having it on the signboard, directing people to our website. You know, my mom and dad are pushing 80. They have a 27-inch iMac, and my dad has a 14-inch iPad, and my mom has a 12-inch iPad, and she's got a smartphone. So our seniors are coming up to speed. So I'm not against saving the money and going completely digital.
Go ahead, Councillor Waring.
I've got no problem with putting it in the paper once, rather than not at all, because with respect to Jonathan's parents, and I know somebody else who's sitting here tonight who's reasonably senior, who has some sort of scientific knowledge when it comes to computers. There's a lot of people that don't still. I think for the time being, to go once in the newspaper, we're saving 50% of the cost, and put the rest as suggested.
Go ahead, Councillor Wilkie.
Just one more thought on newspapers. It's not an easy business, and I do actually have some concern over whether, you know, what happens if we get to a point where there are no newspapers left anymore. I mean, I know we can always amend this bylaw, but it does say one newspaper publication circulating in the area. I could see if, for example, at some point the Western Wheel was gone, but technically the Calgary Herald is still circulating in the area, all of a sudden do we have to?
No, it's local newspapers.
It has to be local? Okay, as long as, I don't wanna get stuck paying Herald rates.
But that's a good point. What if they're no longer printed newspapers?
Well, then there's no,
Use your mic, please.
sorry.
no newspaper circulating.
Yeah, cause that's my, does that, if the Western Wheel, or Okotoks Today, whatever name it goes by, if they completely go digital, there would be correct me if I'm wrong, they're our only local printed newspaper. So would the bylaw then, the fact that there's no local, it's irregardless, doesn't matter?
I'd suggest we'd have to look at the bylaw at that time. I don't see that happening anytime soon because there are a number of seniors in the area that still utilize the newspaper quite a bit.
Okay, go ahead, Mayor Crane.
Yeah, got the computer fired back up. I think it's a straightforward go. One in the paper is gonna be good. And as pointed out, these old guys are getting better with the tech. So really, by the time 5 years rolls ahead, another 10, it's gonna be social media platform, the whole 9 yards. So I'd be quite comfortable giving you the motion, and then we can continue to debate.
Okay.
The Governance and Priorities Advisory Committee recommends Council to advertise the bylaw 20-1101 begin first reading at its July 20th, 2020 summer business meeting, and a public hearing be scheduled to be held at the August 17th, 2020 summer business meeting. And I support this recommendation.
Thank you for that. So we've got a motion. Go ahead, Councillor Waring. Go ahead, Councillor Waring.
I just was going to point out that most of the nonsense I read on Facebook are comments from younger people who've read about something in the Western Wheel. So it's not just us geriatrics that read the Western. Everybody reads it, and you get far more interesting conversations from what people see in the Western Wheel. I very seldom have people who come up to me and say, "Oh, I read this on your website the other day." Nah, never happens.
You don't get out much.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Holiday.
I think that the bylaw, the way it stands, leaves us some room if we need it, where it says that it's in at least one. So if we hit a bylaw that we're really wanting to make sure everybody knows, like the land use bylaw, I mean, we can go over and above and beyond and do it for 3 weeks if we have to, because it's the land use bylaw, something like that. So I'm good with it as just one, and yeah, we can just keep it in mind as a council that if we want something better advertised, we need to ask for it when we're in that process.
Great. Are there any other comments from council? I am seeing none. So we've got a motion from Mayor Crane. We'll call to vote. All in favor? That is everybody. I think Jamie's head was cut off. Okay. Great. One more item, item 6.1. Consideration of a summer governance and priorities advisory committee meeting. What are our thoughts on that? Okay, so we've got Councillor Robb, then Mayor Crane, and then CAO Sharp, or maybe we'll let CAO Sharp go first. 1 second.
Yeah, there you go.
I think just to shed some light on what we've got coming. So we've got currently we've got the council procedure bylaw in the queue as next up for GPAC, as well as a revisit of the water conservation bylaw. Those would be 2 items that we would consider bringing forward. Neither are urgent. Just for council's awareness, neither are urgent, but those would be 2 that we would schedule for the July meeting if needed. As you know, the terms of reference talks about at a minimum meeting quarterly for GPAC. Otherwise, the other option would be that we would push those off till our September GPAC meeting.
Right, and just a thought, if you did decide to go with that would be July just before the July, that would be the Thursday before the July 20th meeting. We might have some recommendations on that slightly that we could put forward at that time too.
Did you say July or August?
It would be, the meeting date would be July 9th.
Is that the third Thursday?
No, that's like 3 weeks from now.
The 16th.
July the 9th, we've got GPAC. We've got ADC.
I I see you, Counselor Rob, I'm just waiting for Todd and Heather.
That's what we found.
1 second.
It is the summer holidays, you guys, and we already have hopefully have a fan meeting coming, we got a council meeting. And if we're gonna meet before our next before the meeting of the July council meeting, we just had a GPAC meeting tonight, we've got 3 bylaws, we'll have a fairly heavy business agenda, I'm sure, for the July meeting, so I'd be okay with August, but I'm not sure July would suit me very well personally. I think it's 2 and 3 weeks is perhaps a little overkill, I think.
September 17th would be the next one if you decide not to go.
Why no August proposed date?
It's totally up to council.
It's up to you guys. It's just harder, scheduling is harder in the summer, that's all. But it's up to council. The next quarterly date would be September the 17th.
Okay, so September the 17th, we're looking at,
Council procedure bylaws.
3 months from today, which maybe is a little long. Counselor Rob has suggested an August date. Is it possible for administration to send out a doodle poll for August?
We're trying to maintain the cadence.
Oh.
There's a reason that we would want it on the third Thursday of the month to maintain the cadence. So we would look at it would be August the 20th. Thursday, August the 20th.
Works for me.
I can make that happen.
Yeah.
Right now it works.
Thursday, August the 20th. Okay, well, let's aim for that then. Okay,
Need a motion then to hold it.
Sure.
okay, we've got Counselor Wilkie.
That we set the date of the next GPAC for August 8th.
You need a mic.
Motion that we set the date of the next GPAC, for Thursday, August 20th.
Okay, all in favor of that motion?
Can't be right. It's not the third Thursday.
Okay, great. So, I think that's it, isn't it? So we don't
Do we
have
have
anything
it
for
in camera?
close?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And stop the recording, Todd. Just saying.
Okay, so we don't have anything for closed, and we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 9:14
And we do have
p.m.
closed, don't we? Do we don't have closed? There's an item on the agenda.
There is.
We have an in-camera on Intergovernmental Relationships, according to me.
Then we
That
just,
was
Which
asked for
we
it,
follow up to Todd's discussion with Shelley.
Is it on the agenda?
One minute.
I was asked to put it on the
Yeah.
agenda.
Okay, so sorry about that, so we're gonna cancel that
Maybe a motion
adjournment.
will close.
And I've got a motion from Counselor Gordon to go into closed at 9:15 p.m.
Sorry, guys. I don't know if I glossed over that or.
I didn't.
You were just given an update, Todd.
Are we in camera?
Yeah. I just lost my
Just a
connection
moment,
for some reason.
I